Hello and welcome to this Cambridge CEM webinar. Thank you for joining us wherever you are in the world today. The title of today's webinar is the Cambridge Wellbeing Check. Before we get started, I'm going to run through a few housekeeping points with you. You may have noticed that your microphones are muted. They will stay on mute as we go through the session to avoid any background noises. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, so do post any questions you'd like to ask in the questions box as we go along through the webinar. You can also use the questions box to ask any sort of general comments. It might be nice now if you want to give us a quick hello in the questions box and tell us where you're viewing from. If you're having any technical difficulties with sound or video, please let us know in the questions box and we'll do our best to resolve them. We recommend you use headphones to listen to this webinar for the best sound quality. We are recording the webinar today, so we'll send you the video and the recording of the slides straight to your inbox next week, so don't worry if you miss anything. Okay, so that's the exciting bit out of the way. I'll now go past you on to Lee Tennant, who's going to take you through a quick rundown of what we're going to be discussing today.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world. I'm Lee Tennant. I'm the Head of International Sales and Marketing for Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring, or Cambridge CEM. Thank you for joining us this morning for the Cambridge Wellbeing Check webinar. We really appreciate you taking out the time in your busy schedules to join us today. We've got a great presentation about to commence, but before we do, I just want to spend a moment to tell you a little bit about us. So we work in over 100 countries in all corners of the world, and we're known for our evidence-based research approach to formative assessments using extensive data sets to support future outcomes. We work with schools, ministries and associations, and in 2019 we were acquired by the University of Cambridge, and we are now part of their wider portfolio, which is supporting our reach and abilities to support young people all around the globe. So we support helping teachers turn data into knowledge, bridging the gap between research and practice, and providing evidence to support good decision making. But in summary, we help you turn data into action to support your decision making and your professional judgment, so you can focus on transforming the outcomes of the students that you teach. With that all said, I'm about to hand over to our presenter for the day, Mark Fraser, to go through our Cambridge Wellbeing Check webinar. I'll be on at the end to answer any questions that you may have, and Mark, I'll hand over to you for the presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you. And hello and welcome to everyone. And thank you very much for joining us. So my name's Mark Fraser, and I'm the Teaching and Learning Lead at Cambridge CEM. So I'm based in the UK, up in the north of England. So it's just getting light here, so it looks a little bit gloomy behind me here. So I hope it's a bit brighter where you are. And I've been with CEM for about 7 years. And before that, I was a teacher and head teacher in 3 different schools in the northeast of England. And as Lee's just said, one of the things that we're trying to do here is bridge the gap between research and practice. And I hope I have a foot in both of those camps. I'm an experienced teacher and school leader, but also with an interest in well-being and other elements of CEM's research over the last few years. Next slide, please. So I've got about 5 main areas to talk about this morning. And as Lee said, we'll have questions at the end. You can possibly type questions in as we go along, and between us, we'll do our best to answer your questions by the end of the presentation. So today I'm going to be thinking about these three things to start with, which are: what is well-being, why is it important, and why assess well-being. Then we're going to have a look in number 4 at what we can provide you with to help you to check and monitor the well-being of your students or pupils in your settings. And then finally, point 5, maybe some personal advice and guidance and what I might do if I was still in school at the moment. Where would I look for sources of support and information? Next slide, please. So firstly, what does well-being mean, especially in the context of school or college or your educational setting? So I'm going to have a look at our theoretical model and where it came from over the next few slides. So next slide, please. When I was looking around to try and put an introduction in place for this, I was looking at other research that's been carried out in the last few years, and I came across this. This is from the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, part of the United Nations. And it's a very positive report that says, you know, in many ways, life's getting better. For a lot of people around the world, things were on the up, things are improving. But just take notice of that date there, March 2020. It's been very different in different parts of the world, but in the UK, we've had a very, very peculiar last couple of years. And to be fair to this report, they do point out that, you know, storm clouds seem to be gathering on the horizon. Despite this positivity, there are problems ahead. And haven't we had a lot of problems in the last few years? Pandemic, war, deepening environmental worries, the cost of living crisis, fuel poverty, all sorts of things. Not necessarily problems that affect children and young people directly, but it affects their families, and it certainly rubs off and has an effect on the well-being of children and young people. So certainly from March 2020, things started to change. Next slide, please. We've got one silver lining perhaps in the cloud in terms of what's gone on in the last few years, and that is perhaps that the importance of well-being has risen to a prominence that it hasn't had in the past. We seem to be taking in a far more serious way the importance of promoting healthier lifestyles, both physically and mentally. The work we've been doing in CEM over the last couple of years started with this piece of research. This was carried out by a couple of colleagues from the Faculty of Education. This is Ros McClellan and Susan Stewart. They looked at well-being in the context of school settings, because when you see some of the other research, certainly that OECD measure there, they have an index of well-being, but they're very sort of adult, grown-up measures, you know, things like workplace satisfaction, income, housing quality, all of these things that affect young people, but perhaps indirectly. Whereas this evidence that we've based our well-being check on is specifically related to children and young people in school and college. The model starts off with two main strands. We have feelings and functioning. How are children and young people feeling while they're in school? How are they functioning? How are they behaving? How are they working? And then that's then subdivided into four sub-areas. Got life satisfaction, how much students enjoy what they're doing, how content they are, negative emotions, how inclined they are to dwell on the negative side of life and how they're affected by stress and sadness perhaps, interpersonal well-being, which is how they get on with other people, what are their relationships like, and finally competence well-being, what sort of skills do they have, how are they being prepared for education and success in the educational world, but also moving on from that into the workplace once they've left the world of education. So that's the basic pillars of our theoretical model. So we refer to these as the four areas of well-being. A few other things to note about the context and concept of well-being. It's subjective. So that means it changes over time. It changes according to context. So that's place to place. We might feel different in school to the way we feel at home. We might feel really positive today, we might feel really down tomorrow. We could feel entirely different next month. And we also know that children with the same physical circumstances can experience very different levels of well-being. So how do you unravel that? How do you unpick that? Well, we would suggest that the only way of doing that is to ask children directly in a discreet and safe and confidential way to find out what they are thinking about their own well-being. So why is well-being in schools important? And this is perhaps one of my two key messages here. It's essential to academic success. If children and students are not in a positive place, they're going to struggle to succeed. So we've seen well-being through various research lenses explored in different ways, and we have two sides of the same coin. So we are fairly confident from the research we've looked at that well-being is intrinsically linked with forms of motivation. So students are well motivated and they want to learn and make progress, they will succeed. The other side of that coin is that if they are not then they are likely perhaps to perform far below expectation, and worse still, they're likely to truant. That's a peculiar sort of English word there. If you haven't heard that before, it means to kind of skip school, to avoid school, not to attend school. And as we know, students, if they're not in school, they're potentially not learning, and it's the beginning of a downward spiral. So engagement and motivation are key to academic success. Further evidence comes from a recent paper that's about to be presented at a conference next month by two of our colleagues from Cambridge, Dr. Zarenka Suto and Tom Benton, and they have looked at a wide range of research and see a relationship between well-being and educational performance. I know there's the old argument about correlation is not causation, but there seems to be a link, not just for the individual. And this is, as a former head teacher, it's the second point that leaps out to me, that it's really important that to be successful in promoting positive well-being, that schools adopt and use whole school approaches, so they're consistent. They have systems that are used by all of their staff, and everybody knows what the process is. And this is heavily dependent upon implementing an effective system. So that was why it was important to assess, or sorry, that was why we think well-being is connected with success in schools. So moving on to the next question, why should we assess well-being in schools? Because assessment sometimes carries a negative label, but I just want to say a little bit more about what we mean by assessing well-being. I think it's possibly the same answer to this question as it is to the more general question as to why we should assess well-being in schools as alongside anything else. Why would we assess anything? Well, I think the key point of doing this is if you can measure or assess something, you obtain better quality information about that thing. And thereby you increase your understanding of it. And you put yourself in a stronger position. You're armed with facts. If you've got those facts, you're in a better position to make decisions and take action. We certainly think this is true in the case of well-being. So, coming soon, I think actually this slide may be slightly out of date. It's here now, the Cambridge Wellbeing Check. And I'll just tell you a little bit about it. We have taken the research and we've put it into a simple and effective questionnaire that you can use with students from about the ages of 7 up to about the ages of 19. So typically through what in the UK we would call primary, or in other places would be elementary education, all the way up to high school and college. We think it's grounded in world-leading research. It's delivered using an easy to use digital platform, and it takes about 20 minutes for students to complete. And importantly, as Lee said, we are providers of formative assessments. So this is not about making judgments or categorizing children in any particular hierarchy. This is about looking at the evidence that is presented that supports our understanding of students and pupils' well-being so that we can do something about it. You can use the Wellbeing Check in 4 different ways. Together with the assessment or the check itself, there's a whole pack of resources, which includes lesson plans, which I'll say a little bit more about in a little while, but you can use these to help teach and explore well-being with students. Following the check, you can look at the well-being of individuals and groups of students across your school or institution. And finally, you can use the Wellbeing Check more than once. So that means you can carry it out, look for issues that come out of this, put implementations and interventions in place, and then come back and evaluate the impact of what you've done. So, next section, a bit more practical now about how the Wellbeing Check works. We're just going to move on. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the assessment itself, the check, and then we'll look at some of the reports that come along with it. Next slide, please. So just to recap on a few of the key facts I mentioned briefly a moment ago, it's a digital system. So that means there is no paperwork, no marking. Once the wellbeing check has been carried out by students, the reports appear very quickly. You can, if you subscribe to the service, use it multiple times throughout the year as you see fit. Some schools may wish to use it at key points in the year, maybe the start of the year, the end of the year, or you might want to use it around times that we know students become quite anxious in the run-up to tests or examinations. So here are two examples of questions. So the whole system is a very, very simple and easy to use system. Now we've got simple language in the questions because, well, two reasons. We don't want children to struggle to understand this. Generally, there are no quick, no trick questions, nothing here. We've boiled the language down to the most basic elements, which we also hope helps for students for whom English is an additional language. We're just trying to keep the language as simple as possible. And it's universal. So this is the same phrasing from year 7, age 7, up to the oldest students in high school and college. And also, I was presenting this the other day, and somebody with sharp eyes noticed, why are you asking sort of questions like this that are quite similar? When I'm at school, I feel happy. When I'm at school, I feel sad. This is a little bit of a safety net that we've built in as well, because sometimes if students are disengaged, there is a risk that they might just click through the answers, just click, 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 done, right, I'm finished, I'm off. But if you as a teacher or a school leader look at the results and you see that if Mark has completed this survey and he's saying that simultaneously he is very happy, always happy when at school, but always sad when at school, that's maybe just a little clue that the questionnaire hasn't really been sort of carried out as diligently as perhaps would be possible. And we have this simple scale, which if we go to the next slide, I can explain a little bit more. It's a 5-point scale, and we have a positive scale and a negative scale depending on the section. So the negative emotions, the negative feelings strand is kind of flipped round, the scale's reversed. That might make a bit more sense when I show you some of the reports in a moment. But basically, for the positive questions, 5 is high. For the negative emotions, 5 is low. So these slides are a little bit small to see, so you might not be able to read these, but when we provide you with the slides afterwards, you can zoom in and you can see the little examples of the reports in a little bit more clarity. But I'll just explain briefly what's going on with our reports. We have a lot of reports. There will be about 13 at launch and more on the way, and they are deliberately designed to be simple and accessible. We're trying to take as many of the complicated statistics out of the reports as possible and just leave simple visualizations of the data that students have provided us with. So that might just be tick boxes like this, or bar graphs, or some simple numerical tables that we'll see. The students are provided with the report themselves, but there are other reports for teachers and school leaders which are confidential and are not to be widely shared. However, we have reports for individuals, for groups, and school level. And you'll see a few examples as I move through. So next slide, please. So this is a summary of the responses provided by one student. So you can see, we've got the first 3 rows there that this student, Martin, has provided quite positive responses. So he's got well up the scale. You can see the blue line extending well to the side of the graph. However, negative emotions, Martin's feeling really quite down about something here. Now, I know this is just sort of made up data that we've based this on, but we've seen this in our trialing, that you get certain areas where children are really positive and other areas where they're not. And we've taken the decision to highlight that. Now, that's not we're not sort of judging students in any way. We're using red to draw your eye to a potential problem, because none of the check is aimed at being diagnostic in the sense that we are not giving you specific information about why a child or a student is feeling in a particular way about something. We're just highlighting that their views maybe are a little bit lower than expected in this case, in this particular strand. And this is just the beginning of the process. This is opening the door to a conversation that the teacher could have with their student to find out more about why they're so negative in this particular moment. But also, I think I've just used the word moment there, we always say this is a snapshot. You can use this multiple times, but please remember that the result of any assessment is recording the feelings of a student at one point in time. So you use this information as part of a toolkit because you see your students all the time, you know all about them. We're just maybe shining a bit of light into a darkened corner here, allowing you to see something that might not otherwise be obvious. Just going to sort of move through some of these quite quickly. So this is one of the confidential reports. It gives the teacher context. So you can see typically what the responses were from each of your students, but also we subtly highlight there, you can see that the second box in the first column there's shaded pink for Harriet there, and maybe that's just showing that again in competence wellbeing she's shown she's not too confident with her skill set, so perhaps Harriet needs a bit of assistance and a chat just to kind of get to the bottom of what the issues might be here. Next slide, please. We can break the mean scores, the average scores down into groups. So this is just an example. We're showing male and female here. We had some questions over the weekend about other gender designations. And again, we're giving thought to how we can show and display that information as well. So that's a feature coming soon. You can drill right down into the individual responses for every question across your groups of students. And again, we're using color here. You can see on the bottom row there is a red bar. There's 20% of students who, in this case, don't feel as if they're doing very well. So why is it that we have nearly a fifth of the sample here, fifth of this class or year group feeling a bit negative and lacking confidence? So again, these are the sorts of things that you might not realize. So you can tackle this in a variety of ways, and we'll come to that in a moment. This is an interesting slide because this is a slide that you can choose to use with groups of students. So we have our lesson plans, which give you ideas what you can do for introductory lessons, but also this would fit into a nice follow-up lesson as well. So the students have been told about well-being and why it's important. They've had the check explained to them. They've done the check. Hopefully they've seen their personal results by this point, but you could use this now to have a wider discussion if that suited your circumstances. So students can discreetly compare their results, the findings from their check experience with the broader findings for their class perhaps. And maybe as a teacher, this would be useful as well. So you can see that, in one particular area, competence, well-being, students are feeling particularly, maybe a little bit concerned. It doesn't look, terrible here. Nothing terrible is happening, but it's just a little bit lower than everything else. So you just, again, conversations and exploration about why that might be so, and what can we do to boost confidence in that particular area of well-being. This is another slide which is showing report for students, but again, this is the individual student. And as you can see, we've taken the numbers out of this. There are no kind of numerical facts and figures here. It's descriptive. So we have these dynamic statements which change. So according to the responses that the student provides, a different set of statements appears. And really, it's just a case of giving students general feedback on their results, but without hanging it on a particular score, because as mentioned in the past, we know students can dwell on particular things and maybe become a bit worried. So we hope that this is softer advice and guidance which opens the door to future discussions. Again, I don't pretend you can read this, but this is just an example of a table because I've gone through that very quickly through all of those reports, but this table is included in the guidance and it's really good for sharing with your colleagues to show them the lists of reports that we provide, what the report contains, and some ideas as to how you may use that report. What sort of uses and context would you use this particular report in? So again, all part of the support and guidance materials. Next slide, please. Which also accompanies the lesson plans here. So at the moment, we have 4 lesson plans. So from ages 7 up to 16 at the moment, and coming very, very shortly, kind of 16 to 18-year-old plan, which is days away, hopefully. So this is the booklet, the cover of the booklet, and just one example page. It's quite a lengthy document, a very detailed document. Some schools may like their staff to use it almost as a script, but again, teachers like myself or teachers I've worked with in the past almost certainly will look at a suggested lesson plan and then take from it what they think is best for their students and their circumstances. So you can take ideas, add ideas of your own in. Again, this is for customers to use in a helpful and constructive way, but as they see fit. Guidance and support, I mentioned just a couple of slides back. We have 3 ways of providing guidance. We've got the full set of documentation, which you can download from the landing page. And you also have access to CEM customer support. You can telephone people, you can speak to people in CEM and in Cambridge, and also send emails asking for help and guidance. And thirdly, we have the online support hub, which is open all the time, so you can access that whenever you need to, just to find out anything you need to know about the wellbeing check, how you might use it, and what you might do next. So, speaking about what we can do next, 5th and final point in my presentation this morning, what can we do to improve wellbeing in schools? When I was in school and we did anything, and my school improvement partner or members of the local authority came to see me and asked me about what was going on in school and how was I moving things forward, there was always that question, so what? So you've done this, you've found this out, what do you do next? Next slide, please. Interestingly, when we think about well-being and how it's affected, there are all sorts of things going on in children's and students' lives. And this slide, which is included in some of the early research, and I saw at the Cambridge International Conference over the weekend, if anybody was there, this was presented in one of the keynotes as well, albeit in a slightly different format. But take notice of the date, 2005. Life was complicated enough then, and I think things are probably far more complicated now, particularly that word up on the towards the top left-hand side there, media. Children and young people have a very, very different experience to media than I had when I was growing up. They have it in the palms of their hand, on a telephone or other devices, mobile phones, and they are really susceptible to positive input, but also negative input, as well as all of these other things. I reckoned when I had my children in school, it was a day school, they typically came in, 9 o'clock, left at 3:30 in the afternoon. I reckoned I had them for about 14% of the year. So what on earth is affecting their well-being for the other 86%? So how on earth do we tackle that? What do we do? In school, you've got to get started somehow. So you've just got to find out what are the priorities, what are we going to focus on to start with. So here are some example questions that you may be asking, or you may be finding out through the evidence you've gathered from the wellbeing check or other sources of information. And you could be thinking about, how are students relating to each other? How are students relating to our teachers? Do they feel stressed? Do they have a sense that they're making progress or not? Do they have a sense of belonging, particularly for new students who've arrived? Or could it be something completely different? So what do? Well, to find out, we assess well-being. You may wish to use our system, you may have your own systems, but again, it's using all of those tools in the toolkit. You gather the information together. You need to tackle this, as mentioned earlier, as a school. You've got to have that whole school approach. So you need a working group. You need to support your staff, and your senior leaders need to sort of be involved at every level in this. And also don't forget about the other stakeholders in school. It's very easy. When I was at school, it's as principal or head teacher, quite often I was well aware that I didn't see reality because people behaved differently when I was around. But there are certain people in school, I'm talking about, the cleaners, the caretakers, the janitors, the road crossing patrol person outside, the school meals people, parents, neighbours of the school. All of these people have a particular view and, interestingly, quite often spot problems well before you do. So it's having that discussion or those channels of communication open, at least, so that problems can be dealt with before they become too serious. Next slide, please. So where would you go to look for information on setting up a process? Again, very UK-centric. In the UK, on the gov.uk website, so www.gov.uk, there is a whole battery of documentation. And if you look in the educational strand, there are thousands of documents. It's 7 years since I left school, but there was a document, this has been updated since, but this is one of the things that I remember from even just 7 years ago that was really helpful to dealing with the process and setting up a process and establishing systems. This is freely available. So I'm suggesting this as a UK example, but you can take it and modify it and it's there for all to see. But basically, it explains that schools have a central role in ensuring well-being. It points out the systems and processes that you need to put in place. And then it mentions a couple of words at the bottom there, culture and ethos. It's about that positive, safe environment. And as teachers and school leaders, that's our key role here. That's what we've got to do. We are the people who need to create that safe space. Both pupils and also staff. Although this well-being check that we're talking about is not designed for staff. Staff mental well-being is very much overlooked and very much central to the performance of your school in general. Next slide, please. There's a paragraph I've picked out here. Again, tiny text, I don't expect you to read it, but I'm just zooming in just to show you that it points out a couple of interesting things here. It recognizes that school staff are not mental health experts, and we should not necessarily try to diagnose conditions. However, what we've got to do is have systems and processes in place for looking for possible problems. And that's what the wellbeing check does for us. It's not diagnosing anything, but it's looking for those problems or potential problems. And there are things that schools can do for pupils. And it's intervening and helping, getting in there before it becomes, a problem that you can't unpick. So how on earth do we do that? Where can we find support and guidance if we as teachers are not the experts? Next slide, please. So we've got, as part of the package, again, a document which is coming very shortly, but you can use this as a starting point until then, that we've got some excellent web resources that we can point you to, that we've had a look at and we think are comprehensive and appropriate for children across the age ranges. When the guide arrives in the next few days, there's a little table at the back which tells you if you're looking, I don't know, at competence well-being and you're concerned about that for primary age children, perhaps you can look at a website like this. This is the Anna Freud organization in the UK, which have some really good resources there that allow you to work with your staff to support your children or students in a wide range of well-being issues. And next slide, please. Also, we have internal information. We've got some resources here from Cambridge International Education, which are perhaps a little bit more useful for you in other parts of the world. We're very mindful and concerned that sometimes well-being issues in the UK, you've got to deal with in a slightly different way to other parts of the world. There may be problems here that you may wish to regard very differently in other cultural settings. So please, any of these resources that we're showing to you, take a professional view, have a look at them, review them with your staff, decide whether they are suitable for you or not. And finally, that bottom document there, that is a briefing document. Again, we think this could be good for staff training, produced by, coincidentally, the person who created the lesson plans, Tanya Clark, who's a researcher in the school, the Faculty of Education, and we think that might be a useful resource for you as well. So I've included the links on these slides. So when they come to you, you'll be able to follow those to those particular resources. And next slide, please. Just to wrap up here now, we've got, again, just a parting thought from me and what I would tell all of my staff when I was in school. What little thing can you do as a teacher to make sure that students are well supported and feel safe? And that's just to form or ensure that every student has at least one positive, appropriate and professional relationship with an adult in school. It could be a teacher, it could be head teacher, it could be one of the lunchtime staff, it could be one of the learning support assistants. You've got a range of adults in your school and they all have a part to play here. If the child does not have somebody to talk to, that's when trouble starts. They need a confidant, they need somebody that they can go to and discreetly ask and find good advice and care. So thank you very, very much for listening. And moving on to the next slide, please. We'll take a few questions now if we've got anybody who would like to ask anything. I think we've got 5 or 6 minutes. Alternatively, if you've got things to ask that you don't want to speak about now or type in the chat, please go to our website there and follow the links to Wellbeing. And if you're interested in subscribing to the service there, you can see on the bottom line there, that's the information that you need to subscribe to the Wellbeing check. So thank you very, very much for listening. And Lee's arrived here now. And if we have any questions, we'll do our best to answer them. Thanks again.
Great, thanks, Mark. We've had quite a lot of questions come in, and my screen keeps updating every sort of second, so it looks like they're coming thick and fast now. So I'm going to just go from the top. So Naira asks, at what point do I share this with students? So I think that's a question about what point in the school year. But I could be wrong. Naira, if you want to get in touch and just make sure that was correct.
Well, I mean, if I could jump in there and just say, as we mentioned, you can use the Wellbeing check at any point. This is up to you as to what suits your circumstances, but it could be, if I was doing it, I'd probably be doing something at the end of the year, at the start of the year for certain, just to establish a benchmark, and then moving on from that at key points throughout the year, perhaps termly. And then you can compare the results over time. Yeah.
I think just to add to that as well, one of the other things that one of our pilot schools identified was that it would be a good opportunity to identify at any intervention point. So if they noticed there was if there was some sort of change in circumstances at home, or a student's performance at school was maybe not to the expected levels, the Wellbeing check could be used as a good intervention tool as well on a one-to-one basis. So that was something that was found from some of our schools that we worked with during the pilot process.
Great, thank you. And Katerina asks, how would you recommend conducting these surveys for children for whom English is not their native language?
I think, as we mentioned, we've tried, although this is in English, we've tried to keep the language as simple as possible. However, I can envisage situations where you could work through this. If every child is sitting in say a room with what we would call a computer suite in the UK, or a computer room, it's possible that the teacher may be able just to guide children through step by step, and just carefully rephrase or explain the question into the local language, and then ask the children to respond before moving on. I suppose that's my thought on making it a practical approach.
Great, thank you. And then we've had quite a few questions around, is there a cost associated for the Wellbeing check? And if so, is it a subscription or a one-off payment?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So yes, so the cost of the Wellbeing check is £3 per student. Now that is for it's for the year effectively, so you can test as many times as you like those students throughout the year. So whether you test once or twice, like Mark mentioned before, termly, or whether you want to test at several points throughout the year, that cost is the same. It's £3 per student.
Great, thanks, Lee. So Deepti asks, will it suggest strategies to improve wellbeing in school?
We have some guidance as to what you might do for lesson plans, as mentioned, and we have the web resources, kind of the next steps. And again, maybe from this presentation here, there are little ideas from the Cambridge and the example of the UK guidance that I showed, which may help from a policy point of view as well. So hopefully we're covering, the establishing the system, implementing the system, and the kind of follow-up, so what sort of question afterwards that comes along once you've carried out the wellbeing check.
Great, thank you. And 1 second, let me just scroll through. So you said that the survey can be shared with learners. Would you say that's a good idea if maybe their results aren't as positive as you would have expected?
I think this is all down to discretion and professional judgment. Again, teachers, you need to really think about this, because students need to be very confident that what they're telling you is going to be treated safely and confidentially and with care and sensitivity. All of those, the ethos and the climate that we talked about, really, really important. However, I think we've got to accept as well, whenever we ask questions, of our students, we may receive sort of unexpected answers. And maybe that's something that you need to sort of prepare yourselves for, but also be very clear with the students how this information will be used. It's all about trust. It's all about supporting each other, but absolutely, dealing with this in a discreet and sensitive way is absolutely key. And this is meant to improve well-being, not decrease it. So again, think about it. What's your whole school approach? Why do you want this information? How are you going to use it in an appropriate way?
Great, thanks, Mark. And so the next one is from Chankia, and she asks, could you elaborate on the relationship between well-being and SEL? So that's social and emotional learning.
I think we've got, again, some of the research that which we've got. If we scroll down, sorry, one more slide as well, in the slide deck, we've got some references for anybody who would like to dig further into the research, some real detailed information here. And I think that would give you a very sort of holistic overview. I think we can probably provide you with the bottom one. The top two would be freely available there. And then if people wanted to see a copy of the bottom document, just drop us a line and we can share that with you. But in terms of the social and emotional aspects of well-being, we hope that all of those things are covered by the 4 pillars of the model. Certainly the interpersonal relationships are certainly taking account of that. And again, that's the self side of things. This is all about confidence and well-being and being in a positive position. So all of those things are inextricably linked. But again, for a more detailed response, I would refer you to some of the research that we've done here and referred to. So please let us know if you'd like to know more.
Great, thank you. By my watch, that is all the time we've got for questions. We have had lots come in, so we'll try to get around to answering all those questions via email. If we haven't, so don't worry if we haven't answered yours in this session. We'll get back to you, along with the presentation slides and the recording of the webinar next week.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Adam, if we can just go back 2 slides just before we wrap up, if that's okay. And I just wanted to just firstly thank everyone for attending and for the questions. There have been some brilliant questions in there, because I've been looking through the chat, and we will, between Mark and I, we will come back to everyone. But I just wanted, a couple of questions have been, how can I subscribe? So it's that top link there, www.chem.org/wellbeing. If you go onto there, there is 2 buttons available on there. The first one is find out more, and that will take you through an expression of interest form, and one of the team will get in touch with you and provide you any further information that you need. And then there's also the buy wellbeing button as well, so you can purchase the wellbeing product there as well. So if you have any any questions, please feel free to continue answering in the chat. Mark and I will answer them. But if not, please head to the website and you'll get all the the further information there as well. So, but yeah, thank you so much to everyone for attending this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening from wherever you are. Yeah, we'll speak to you all soon.